Are called to order. See the members present are of the working group are Brian Keeley, myself, Kevin Thornton, and Patricia Schwartz. And our next item on our agenda is our really single item, which is the evaluation of our project tools. And I believe that Josh has some additional information for us to look at, kind of catching up to where we were and continuing on, and hopefully talking about how the things that we're trying to put together will fit in with the current tables and databases that we're working with through the CAC's work itself.
Great. Thanks, Tom. And last cycle, I gave a bit of an update that we kind of dwelled in for a bit. So I was really kind of trying to tighten up this particular presentation. I'm kind of briefly touching on an update, but I think the real meat is going to be in the last two slides. And so, you know, we had kind of, I think it's wrong. There we are. We had looked at how the goals, what data sets may be associated with the goals. We kind of talked about kind of the state of the practice, previously looking at the ADOT's P2P exercise, RMAP 2045 exercise, and also acknowledging the fact that the city of Tucson, with Move Tucson, went through a similar data-driven performance-based planning exercise. And, you know, where you start with your goals, you identify your data, what is that performance assessment, and then kind of how does that translate into a score. So I'm going to, we ended the last discussion with looking at our goals and discussing data that may be relevant. Kind of want to touch all of this content that I'm about to breeze through are going to be on the last two slides, where we kind of talk about, well, what does that mean? How do we turn that into a score? So we had identified, of the 10 goals that the committee, that broader CAC group I wanted to be data driven. We kind of isolated 3 of them that needed some additional interpretation. And so that's flagged with the statement of depends on interpretation of the data, the project description. So of these first 2, manage and reduce congestion, you know, is there presence of congestion? That would be a qualifier. That's a piece of information that we have. But whether or not it's using strategies and tools such as TDM and ITS, travel demand management and intelligent transportation systems. That's going to be an assessment of that scope, right? Provide the next goal, looking at providing safe, reliable, healthy, and efficient regional mobility. We kind of acknowledge travel time. And we'd also kind of talked about, like, there's some overlap in these goals where there's some duplication of emphasis areas. So safety is acknowledged here, but it's actually a little bit more explicitly not acknowledged in the next goal of reducing crashes among vehicles, bicycles, pedestrians, and others. So kind of keeping that separate and being able to stand on its own, we identified the intersection and roadway level of safety service. And with the intent of trying to identify data that we either have already shared through the platform or we have at our fingertips, so that we don't have to engage in a 3 or 4 month exercise to go build some information to help inform these decisions. We don't have that much time. The next goal of reducing wildlife-related crashes, provide wildlife connectivity. There's a set of current environmental impact PMs that are in the RMAP that we kind of discussed that reflect this well, but you know, how do we incorporate those? We'll get to that in a sec. improving the conditions of existing infrastructure for all transportation modes. So we have performance data on pavement, the condition of the pavement, bridges, and we also have kind of presence and tier of sidewalks, and then tier of bike facility. Is it a bike lane? Is it a separated bike lane? Is it a bike boulevard? Is it a shared use path? So those can be used in part to help inform that goal. And then these next two goals provide safer, more connected bike ped facilities, enhance health through active transportation modes. This is actually the two data sets here, bike level of stress and pedestrian level stress, kind of get at that broader, what's the functional use of that roadway? What tier of user is it going to attract? Kind of more beginner, intermediate, or casual users, or is it going to be really geared towards those road warriors that aren't going to be intimidated by traffic? And so this gets at that kind of environmental presence of cars and the stress that has on these vulnerable users. So I feel that these two data sets, while we don't have them explicitly in the platform right now, it's an interpretation of data that we do have at our fingertips. So that I felt was a way to get at this this goal in a kind of a consistent and apples to apples way. The next goal being improve quality of air, water, wildlife habitat, and reduce greenhouse emissions and vehicle miles traveled was one of the goals that we felt was a little bit more difficult to assess at the project level, and maybe one that would be better assessed kind of qualitatively by the group. And so that is why it's referenced. Depends on interpretation of project description. And then to close it out, the third goal that we had identified as being kind of more qualitative assessment that may be better done by group assessment was the improved multimodal performance and access to key destinations, including but not limited to activity centers, workplaces, medical care, education facilities, and grocery stores. The goal of adding multimodal functionality to key corridors, actually kind of revised this a little bit since the last discussion. The RTA projects are bringing that multimodal functionality as they're applied. So I think the condition on this is it on a key corridor? And we can kind of discuss this, but this is, kind of what I'm offering here, this proposal to kind of move forward and get some feedback on. And then improve transit ridership. We have a high frequency network that we can assess whether or not the project is on that and could contribute to the overall functionality of that corridor. So the last two slides, this is the second to last slide, is kind of breaking down those first 5 goals, and the last slide covers the last 5 goals, right? And so it's essentially what I've shared. The things that are new on this are the the goal and the framework goals are described there. The data sources are what were referenced, and then the individual interpretation is kind of that flag of, hey, is this a goal that we want to go and solicit group input on, and get the group to weigh in on how they feel each project makes an impact on that goal. And then the meat of what I feel like would be worth discussing is the proposed scoring. So, as we think, how do we want to align? All right, we have these data sources, but then what? I started with the base assumption that we wanted to treat all the goals equally, so they could all get a total of 10 points. We have 10 goals that could give us a score of 100, right? It's at the discretion of the group. This is a proposal. I figured it's better to make edits to something than just have a blank sheet here. But this is a starting point, and the proposed scoring And and like last time, maybe we skip goal 1 and get moving with goal 2 to kind of get into the flow, and then because the first one's a little messy, right? So goal 2 and 3 are complementary, wherein goal 1 is looking to provide safe, reliable, healthy, and efficient regional travel. That safe component is double down on goal 3, right? So I feel like the safe is captured, the safety component, the intent is captured in goal 3. And so looking at travel time index, it would be a an assumption inherent in this is that it would be a 2045 no build, so future travel time with, for that growth period based on our long range plan. We wouldn't be looking at kind of 2019, the current year travel time index. It would be that future year travel time index based on our regional expectations for growth that we're going to be looking to address with this programming of funds, or so 2045 no build scenario travel time index, where poor travel time, if the extent of the project was identified with poor travel time, it would get the max number of points, because we would want to be looking to address areas where that portion of the network was poorly performing. And
Hey, Josh.
Yes.
I wonder, can we dive into this just a little bit?
For sure.
I know you went over it pretty quickly, and I probably missed some of it, or may have a bad idea about some of the others, but this is goal 2, has these different terms in it: safe, reliable, healthy, efficient. What kind of data sources do we have for each of those, or would we have for each of them individually? I know what we're trying to do is pick 1 or 2 data sources to reflect the entire goal, but just humor me for a minute and talk about the individual ones, because I think some of them, may fall outside of where data sources exist, and get back into what we just tried to avoid on talking about on goal 1, which is maybe a group think.
Right. And so safety.
I understand.
Yeah, we have level of safety service. For healthy,
About
interpreting
reliable.
health. I'm sorry. So reliable, to me, that is what the travel time is helping describe, is, and I'll just go ahead and read this for everyone's edification. The travel time index is a ratio of the average time during the peak compared to the free flow travel time. So the index represents the average additional time required for a trip during the peak times compared to that trip during non-heavy traffic conditions. So that gets at that reliability and efficiency. That's a measure that can kind of address both of those issues. So that and is something that we have readily available. Healthy, I feel, beyond, outside of the safety component of health, am I going to be injured moving through this corridor? To me, my understanding of healthy would be more of an active modes consideration, and there are a number of active mode components in the other goals. So goal 5 looks at kind of condition of the sidewalks, presence of sidewalks, and if we go to goal 6, providing safer mode connected bicycle and pedestrian facilities, that's getting at the improving that. So, if it's represented, it's represented here. Also in goal 9, looking at multimodal functionality to key corridors. That is another place in which that multimodal component, those active modes, are expressed. But where in goal 2, isolating the piece of information that isn't expressed elsewhere, that travel time is an expression of that reliability and efficiency of the regional network, regional mobility.
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay. And so,
can we just
please.
ask if the rest of the committee is happy with this idea of kind of picking out the main points within a goal, the main thrust of the goal, finding how we do it, and then make sure that the other components of it are handled maybe more directly or prominently in one of the other goals so that we don't lose them.
Brian Kiwi here.
Yeah,
I would agree with that statement and where we're trying to go. I'm trying to keep the main focus for each of these goals and what can quantitatively actually be evaluated.
Yeah, and I think for me, we have a lot of crossover in our goals, a lot of common themes, if you will, that kind of go through multiple goals, and to make matters easier on ourselves, it seems like we should find all of those themes and try to put them in the right place so that we're capturing them and we're coming up with really good data sets for them, and the ability to consider them, as opposed to having to talk about them maybe in a slightly different way within each of the goals that they seem to come, that they seem to be threaded through. So that's kind of all I was getting at. Kevin?
Yeah, I was going to just kind of echo with all the overlap. I definitely agree with kind of the approach that Josh is suggesting here.
Very good. Okay.
Great. And it looks like, okay. So with goal 3, reduce crashes among vehicles, bicycles, pedestrians, and others. The level of safety service for the roadway and the intersection, those are comprehensive in looking at the safety profile. We're not isolating it to vulnerable users, the bike ped component of the safety profile. We're looking at all of them. So I do feel like that data does cover that range. And since we do have both roadway and intersection, so essentially the max points you could get for a poorly performing set of intersections in a corridor would be 5, with the expectation that you would then have those roadway components as well. So if you had poorly performing roads and intersections, you could get a max of 10 points. Otherwise, it would be some combination, 8 points if one was poor and one was fair, or 2 points if they were both good, acknowledging that there's always going to be room for improvement, even if it's currently good operating. Bringing it up to standards is the reason why I kind of left 1 point at the for the good classification. Kevin?
Yeah, just a quick question. Thank you. On goal 3, does the LOSS, does that take into account severity of the crashes? Like, is it,
Right.
you might have 7 crashes on corridor A, and maybe you have 7 on corridor B, but corridor B has
Right.
5 fatalities.
It does not. I mean, it does not at that scale. We do take it into consideration on account of a limitation to the data. We're only looking at injury severity 2 through 5. We're not looking at property damage only incidents severity 1, because TPD stopped reporting to them, and we saw a dramatic decline in the overall count of crashes in the city. And so, whereas all the other jurisdictions are reporting, as fully as they can and responding as fully as they can to those PDOs, we saw a 66% decline in the 3 years before and the 3 years after TPD's decision to stop responding to all PDO calls. So that greatly skewed the data. Basically, none of the poorly performing segments of the network showed up in the city of Tucson in the top 20. And we knew that didn't align with reality. So we're only looking at possible injury and up. So, but we aren't weighting it for severe incidents, as kind of your question was asking.
Is it possible to weight it for severity? And I guess where I'm going with this is, we know there's certain corridors in, say, the city, for example, First Avenue. We know that's a heavily, there's a lot of pedestrian fatalities in that area.
Right.
And it seems like fatalities and maybe pedestrian fatalities should be weighted a little bit higher than, level 2 type crashes.
Right. And
so I'm not sure if that's possible. I guess that's what I'm asking. Is it possible to weight that kind of information?
There was a decision to not go forward with severe incident SPF development. So these level of safety services are based on those safety performance functions. And I guess the idea being that given minor insignificant changes, honestly, a PDO could turn into an incapacitating injury. And so having that broader look at the overall profile is kind of, it helps us identify where those areas are poorly performing, because it's often just a twist of fate that changes some of those lower severity into a higher severity. So we didn't want to discount if there was a crash history, if there was a large volume of crashes in that area that could potentially then have moved into those severe. I think Tom was first, and then Paul is going to try to bail me out on the art SPF work.
Yeah, we should probably let him do that. But is there a way to indicate kind of percentage of bike and/or ped involvement in accidents? In other words,
we have a tremendous amount of data, and it's just a matter.
It seems to me that if everything we're talking about is severe injury or beyond PDO, property damage only, then if we can say that a pedestrian or a bicyclist was involved in some way in this crash, we can pretty well say that it reflects, in severity, because those are typically almost by definition going to be more severe. And because there's so much fewer than in just gross numbers, it would seem like that would be a fairly sensitive metric that we could look at. I don't know, but just a thought that if we can pull out the ones that are bike and ped and compare that to the percentages of those accidents found on other similar corridors, we may be able to see what Kevin was describing, that, oh, look, First Avenue has a tenth of the projects are showing, or a tenth of them are, or a tenth of the crashes are bike or ped involved, and And if we look over on Orange Grove, it's 1%.
Right.
And we can
And
see relative severity, if you want to use that word.
right.
Between
And just for that example, First Avenue shows up poorly, so the SPF, level of safety service method, does identify that for the type of facility that that First Avenue is, it's an urban multi-lane facility. It does show it is performing worse than its peers. So that's kind of the construct of the SPF. Like what is the expected number of crashes on a facility like this with this configuration and these volumes? Are we seeing more crashes than what we would expect? Or are we seeing fewer? And so that's what that. So it's a little more sophisticated than just that. So it's using that predictive modeling component on that. We could certainly flag those. We have tremendous amount of data on all of this. Paul, do you want to jump in?
Sure. Yeah, as Josh mentioned, all of that can be provided supplementally, and then you can consider how you want to propose the scoring. So I think there's a good construct here. If you wanted to add in, well, if you have, a fair performing LOSS location, but you have a fatal or more than a certain number of fatals, maybe then that bumps up into a higher category and gets more points. So you can kind of tinker with the proposed scoring based on some of the vulnerable crashes and the fatal crashes as well. But the larger point is considering how you might want to weight safety, as a priority amongst all these goals, or,
right.
The starting place of 10 per goal makes a lot of sense. And it's good to have that on the board. But if safety priority is something that the committee feels needs more emphasis, then that should be considered within the max points possibly. I got to jump off, but a couple additional things just to put on your plate a little bit. I'm wondering if goal 2 can in any way address modes other than traffic travel time of vehicles. And so not quite sure what data sources might be available for that. But
do you have any suggestions?
Well, I'm thinking like
throwing that idea out there.
Have you considered the planning time index in terms of the, being that goal 2 is kind of seems to be focused on travel time reliability.
Right.
It's not necessarily the overall travel time. It's how consistent is your travel time? Is it always consistent, or is it deviate a lot? On an arterial network, you're probably not going to have a lot of deviation, but
that would essentially be the TTI, but with a 95%.
Right. Exactly.
Okay. So,
and then if there's another way to bring in transit or some other mode, mobility measure, I'm not sure how to do that, but and maybe that's captured elsewhere, but it almost appears that goal 1 and goal 2 are just different ways to measure traffic congestion. So keep that in mind. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, everybody.
Thank
you, Paul. Appreciate being here.
So we can touch on goal. Brian, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I'll keep this real brief. Sorry.
Sure.
Does the TIMS reporting every year provide any additional information on the safety that can be utilized? Number 1, and then number 2. I want to ask, like, when we're grading something on safety, right? Like, let's say we have a 2-lane undivided roadway that is being proposed with no sidewalks, no bike lanes. And the proposal is for a 4-lane divided highway with sidewalks and bike lanes. Mm-hmm. To me, that provides significant safety with the divided roadway, the addition of a bike lane, and addition of a sidewalk compared to what it currently stands. So how does those new additions where they don't exist before factor into the weighting?
So the level of safety service as a data set. So we have a whole platform designed to assist safety performance and evaluation and looking at the details of what's happening on the site. In terms of having a high level metric to assess safety performance, we've moved beyond looking at just traffic crash rate, which is kind of a standard method. And we've broken the network into 6 different classifications. 2 are intersection related, signalized intersection related. One of those is a 4-leg signalized intersection. The other is a 3-leg signalized intersection. And for the roadways, we have a rural 2-lane undivided. So we're looking at all the roads that meet that universe, that class of facility type. And then let's stick with that one as an example. So then we take all of those here, I can pull it up, all of those segments, and we plot the volume on the x-axis and the observed crashes on the y, and then we plot a curve through it. So that's that function. So based on a rural 2-lane road with a volume of 10,000, what are we expecting to see on that facility? And so so it's a scatter plot, and then you draw that function through it. So we've done that, and that way we can evaluate, is inherent in this process is acknowledging that with conflict, with these different facility types, with volumes, with exposure, there are going to be crashes. So the question is that this level of safety service helps us identify is, are the crashes we're seeing on that particular facility above or below what other facility types like that are, how other facility types like that are performing in the region. So we're really helping evaluate it to our region. This is, we've cycled through it twice. It's a highway safety manual, safety performance functions. It's a best practice. We initiated it in 2016, and then we updated it again with the more recent. They really recommend you do it every 5 years. We did that in 2019 for this exercise. So what your question about that 2-lane urban facility. So we have 3 other urban roadway facilities, 2-lane, and then multi-lane, divided, undivided. And so how does that current performance, how is that current facility performing, is kind of the question. And where is there room for improvement? Is it performing better than expected or worse than expected? If it's performing worse than expected, that indicates an area where there's opportunity to improve performance and reduce crashes on our network. So that is what this level of safety service gives us. We can certainly fold in, I'm looking at the 1,233 bike ped incidents that have occurred since 2017. Of those, let's see how many are incapacitating or fatal. There's 599. So we have really detailed information as we go in, but as an overall assessment of where can we affect change, LOS is a very, very strong platform. We can add in more information if we want to. And Tom, I'll stop talking.
Yeah, thank you, Josh. That was very helpful.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess the question that comes up then is, how do we assess the project that's being proposed? Because we may, by putting in a higher level facility, increase speeds, which may cause additional conflicts. We may have a different, put in
Yeah.
a new signal as an example that
Right.
might increase intersection type conflicts. If the speeds go up and the volumes go up, what are we comparing that to? Because we've just been comparing this 2-lane road to other 2-lane roads
Right.
and saying, yeah, this one is clearly above
Right.
the standard that we expect out of the others. But we also know that it's a substandard road, or at least jurisdiction believes it is, and already needs to be upgraded. We're just kind of look at how much
Yeah.
does it need to be updated, and does the proposed project have a really good likelihood of solving those problems?
Right. And we've had a decent amount of discussion about, outcomes based,
Yeah.
assessment. And honestly, safety is probably one of the areas that we have most resources in the industry to kind of look at what those countermeasures, what are impacts of putting in a median, what are impacts of putting in lighting, what are those crash modification factors. Unfortunately, like at this stage of the planning process, we don't really have a lot of those details. And for safety, we could probably go there, right? Like we could probably
Yeah.
put a decent amount of energy, but ultimately the potential for improvement, you can put in these facilities, but if there's no observed crashes on that facility, because it's a well performing facility, then you're not going to get those returns. So this LOS is a bit of an input into, well, then what are we going to do to fix that problem area? And so I think an assumption that we can't, I don't know how to get around this assumption, is that any investment is going to affect the poorly performing components, poorly performing areas of that project extent. And that's going to come through in the design level, and at later stages. I mean, we have a 2-sentence description of these projects at this point. So like that information, I feel as if we're at a stage in which we need to recommend a package of projects for further review that is going to give us the best potential to improve our regional network along these goals.
And so if you're looking at safety as one of your metrics, you would, by the logic you're laying out, you would pick the ones that have the worst level of safety and level of the worst LOSs, and those would be the ones where the greatest opportunity for improvement exists, and therefore maybe the most likelihood that we can actually propose a project that will improve things. Okay, I get it, and I think it's probably the only logical way we can go at this point, but we have to also be able to defend, I think, the type of project to be applied and logically expect improvement to each of the kind of factors that contribute to an LOSS, or a high one.
Right.
So a really high LOSS because of pedestrian fatalities, let's say.
Right.
Is sidewalks adding sidewalks where none existed, or separating movements, or simply widening a roadway and putting a median in. Are those positive or negative improvements that are expected? And I think those are the kind of conversations we'll have to have with the committee to say, here's a safety project. And these are the problems with it that contributed
Right.
to being a safety issue.
Right.
And these are the jurisdictional or regional or, community desires for addressing those. And therefore, this project, scores highly.
Right. And touched on it last time. I mean, every one of our jurisdictional partners, safety is an important aspect to any project, and within RTA we have the design level RSA baked in to the current RTA program, so that when the construction documents are, I forget, say 80% at the design stage, fairly long down along the process, there where you can see the lane configuration, you can see the geometry of the intersections, that that RSA, that roadway safety assessment, is that design level RSA takes place to say, hey, there's, maybe we can tweak some of this here, because I see why you did this, but looking at it through a safety lens, we can make some tweaks to it now before we poured concrete or laid asphalt that can improve the performance of the network. So that's definitely it's embedded into the process now. I would expect that it's well received, so I'd expect that it would continue. It's certainly something that is important. Ava?
Josh, real quick, how long has it been embedded in the process?
I don't know. That's a good question. Farhad?
Of course, just to answer the question, I would say early on in the process, as we started developing design for most of the projects, we went through our safety assessment during the design period. So I would say as early as 2010.
Thank you. So Tom, is it so I'm happy to add more to the goal 3 if we want to have some additional points to indicate vulnerable user fatalities. One of the things that that SPF looks at, that 5-year period, is in part to not like go and chase fatals, and just as if and be reacting to hotspots as they pop up. What are some of those systemic issues that occur, and why we kind of want to look at that 5-year period, that longer view. We can add that in, but I do feel that the LOSS is a pretty representative metric for safety, one that most regions don't have, to be honest with you. Farhad?
If I may suggest, it might be helpful to look at all of them and then kind of get a good perspective of where those overlaps are.
Okay.
And then maybe come back after you have a chance to look at them all. Thank you.
So goal 4, reduce wildlife related crashes and provide wildlife connectivity. So, we had touched on this last time. There is an environmental impact performance measure that is in the platform, that was in our RMAP, and I thought I had this pulled up already, so I'm sorry. And we're looking at the high impact, and this is available from any of the PM reports. It's that column that's sitting in the so are the safety columns are sitting in the grid. The environmental impact is sitting in the grid, and if you want to understand what that PM is based off of, you can look at the report, and that first page executive summary tells you what the project assessment criteria is. And for environmental impact, the project extent intersects either a priority riparian area or wildlife corridor. It has a high impact. And so And those important riparian corridors were in part developed or initially developed by Pima County Regional Flood Control District that were later folded into the Habitat Conservation Plan. The wildlife corridor data set was a project that RTA in part funded with Arizona Game and Fish, and looking at what those flows, we pulled up the map last time when we looked at those areas, those connections between the Sky Islands and how is wildlife moving. So I think that we can lean on that high impact, that assessment of whether it's, so high impact does the project touch, essentially, does it cross into an important riparian area or a wildlife corridor? If so, then it's a high impact. If more than 20, a moderate impact is if more than 25% intersects other priority biological area as delineated in the Pima County Habitat Conservation Plan. And then, and if it doesn't intersect any of these areas, then it's a low impact. So for this goal, I'm proposing that if the project is high impact, then it gets 0 points for reducing wildlife crashes. And if it's low impact, it gets 10 points for reducing wildlife crashes. And that if the scope identifies the project as a wildlife linkage project, then it gets 10 points. None of the projects in this list are identified as such. So, so leaning on if it's in that high impact area, or if it's in the low impact area, that point distribution for those as it relates to, and if we wanted to have address the middle tier of the other priority biological area getting 5 points, then we can assign that as well. But it was kind of almost binary in is it or isn't it?
Hey, Josh, did the questions, or was there a specific question that needed to be answered affirmatively or negatively by the jurisdictions that would have forced them to identify it as a linkage project, if it were? Or is it possible that some are or could be, and we just don't know it because either the jurisdiction didn't mention it or we don't recognize it as such?
It wasn't, but and I guess that would be a staff interpretation of
Okay.
If the scope identified, providing wildlife connectivity.
Okay. That's all.
Or-
That's all I was asking. I didn't
Yeah,
remember that there was actually something that there was a box to check, in other words.
Right.
yeah, actually, along those lines, we did have a box to check at the time. Is it aligned and does it provide wildlife crossing connectivity? So obviously, it's their interpretation of what they wanted to say yes or no to, but there was a box for a yes or a no answer.
It was related to reducing wildlife crashes.
Yeah.
Not providing wildlife connectivity.
Yeah.
It's just kind of interesting that we had some of those projects in RTA 1, and there aren't any being proposed in RTA next. It just sort of surprises me because most of the feedback that I have heard has been pretty positive about them. I think people, once they understand what they are, tend to be supportive of them. And I'm just kind of curious about it, I guess, wondering.
So if I may, Tom, I think that's kind of along those lines of once you start doing your design concept report and identify some of the needs, those are some of the things that may come up later in the process. And they may not have identified it currently, but they may in the future.
Yeah, as opposed to a standalone project like Oracle Road or something that
Yes.
that was known from the beginning that they wanted to do it. Or is there actually is there actually a separate bucket another element, let's say that some of those projects that can't be identified yet, without going into some more design work, would be able to utilize a part of the bucket to take care of them.
Currently in the RTA one, it is a separate bucket. So typically that's why later
Yeah.
on in the process, they would come up and take advantage of that.
Okay, good.
Tom, do you want to pick who's next? I'm not sure who.
Oh, go ahead, Rick.
Yeah, I was going to add on to what Farhad then just said is that was the kind of the idea. So several of the projects, the wildlife linkage money was a separate categorical standalone, and it could be applied to either new construction type of widening projects. So it could supplement or augment that if there was a wildlife element to it, Tangerine, Camino de Mañana, other eligible type roads, or as standalone, it's just a pure retrofit, or to other jurisdictions that may be widening a non-RTA road, and we can come in and plug it in like on SR 77. So the variability of that applied across the entire realm of all those projects. I say that because that's probably how we'll look at some of these things going forward, unless there's a known crossing item like what Josh is talking about. We would incorporate that within the scope discussions, but that's a next level of detail that we haven't gotten into with the initial descriptions.
And is this bucket, is this element still a part of our, if you will, tentative or draft list of the categoricals?
So as of right now, the board hasn't tackled anything except for the roadway element itself. So they'll be providing guidance and direction on those other sub elements or categoricals as they go forward.
Yeah, no, I get that. But we, the CAC a few years ago actually went forward with essentially adopting the categoricals that existed in RTA 1, and that's been I think the standing platform, if you will, of categoricals.
Kind of the starting point.
I just don't remember if that was specifically in that list.
Yep, wildlife linkages is a standalone element, sub element underneath, I think, environmental and economic.
So I'm remembering that right, aren't I, Farhad?
Yes, sir. I was just going to say that was correct. It was included as one of the potential categoricals, and like Rick said, we hope to make sure that we keep it in there.
Yeah. Okay, Kevin.
Yeah, as I was just going to mention on this one, if similar to like goal 3, we're pretty much now doing the RSAs as a standard part of the project. For goal 4 here, if we have a corridor that is in a sensitive area for wildlife, something like that, is there something that I don't know if mandate's quite the right word, but is there something that we can do to make sure that we, as the RTA, as these projects are going forward, to make sure that the design teams are looking into it and, addressing it basically, if it's in a sensitive area?
Yeah, if I may answer that again, as we discussed, as part of the DCR environmental studies, that's definitely a process that we look at early on in the development of the plan. And by practice, we're all doing that as we speak, but it would be really easy to include that in eligibility for that bucket, if you will.
Yeah, that sounds perfect.
Okay, I'll jump into goal 5 if that works. Improve the conditions of existing infrastructure for all transportation modes. And here I'm looking at that, or proposing we look at the pavement, bridges, sidewalk, and bikeways. Where, and as we're combining that all, the max that you can get for poor pavement is 2 points. And then since we had 4, I had to give 1. They couldn't all be 3. So the max points you could get for a poorly performing, poor condition bridge is is 3 points where pavement is 2. And then sidewalks, we have a sidewalk assessment, and if that is poorly performing, or you could get a max of 3 points. And whether or not there are bike lanes or no bike lanes, you could then get 2 points, is kind of a proposal here. Trying to touch on all of those. The transit pieces do show up later, but this is looking at kind of that improve the condition of existing infrastructure side of it. Is there any discussion on that?
Yeah, Josh, it starts to get a little confusing, I think, to the committee when you compare like goal 4 and 5, where you're assessing either the proposed project or the existing one, and good is bad in one and bad is good in the other. And understanding that, as an example, in goal 4, a project that is likely to have high impact gets no points, even though the project that is proposed may very well greatly improve that issue.
Right.
And yet then we go to goal 5, and the worse the bike lanes or the worse the sidewalks are.
So no, that's
better.
that's a very good point. So like on goal 4, I mean, do we want to look at if it's an existing facility in those areas as opposed to a brand new facility? Because if you put in a brand new facility in a wildlife corridor, that's not going to improve wildlife connectivity.
Yeah.
And so that could be a threshold. I mean, we could do that.
So Tom,
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, if I may, Tom. So that the challenge is really on the language. So goal 4, we're reducing, obviously. Goal 5 is improving. So, in the absence of having to go back and adjust the language, that's why the scoring appears to be in favor of or not in favor of based on that language. So I would just highlight that so everybody understands that obviously reducing wildlife-related crashes is a good thing. And if you have high impact, then that's a lower score. And then vice versa, improving the condition of the road is a good thing. So if you're improving the condition, then absence of something gets a higher score as well.
So I think we can account for. We don't want to go suggest changing the goals for the work that's been put into them, and so getting the scoring to reflect it. And Tom, I agree. After I read it, I agree that may be inverted. The potential for change, as goal 3 and 5 are kind of saying, hey, if it's poorly performing, then this project's going to improve it, right? This has the potential to change it in a good way. I'm a little conflicted with the way in which 4 is framed, in that it is kind of almost the first half is opposite of the second half. I mean, to a degree. But if we were to look at high impact of existing facilities that are in high impact areas, then if you're going to be modifying that, then you have greater ability to affect that change. But if it's a brand new facility and high impact area, then it doesn't.
Yeah, no, I know what both of you are saying, and I don't disagree. It's just that just compare it to goal 3.
Right.
I guess really what we're talking about is that we don't have actual wildlife incidents data, and we're just going to presume that the more you touch an existing road in a high impact area, the worse it's going to be. Whereas in goal 3, kind of doing the opposite. You're saying the more crashes there are, we have to do something. So, let's improve this road. And
I think you pointed out something. I think with an existing facility that those points could be inverted. I think that your statement makes sense.
Yeah.
To get everything on what is the potential for change.
Yeah. Okay. Next.
Okay. So you kind of get the flow of 2 through 5. So let's touch on goal 1 here. Manage and reduce congestion by using strategies and tools such as travel demand management and intelligent transportation systems. So this is a solution-specific goal for a performance issue. Performance issue is congestion, right? And so if there is no congestion, then does a project deserve to get points if it's applying ITS and TDM strategies, or as many points as it would want to get or should get if it is a congested facility? To me, reading this goal, you would really only you would get the maximum number of points if poor future no build scenario congestion exists and the scope reflects an ITS TDM solution. And then I have the range kind of going down towards if it's good, if congestion is good, is not bad, you get fewer points. So that is something that I think is a bit of a blend of something that we do have data, but would also require an interpretation of the scope. Now, does that make sense?
If I understand, you're saying that if ITS TDM is not in the scope, then this will be 0 points, no matter
Right.
Yes. What the future prediction is, as opposed to looking at goal 1 as manage and reduce congestion and bonus points for using strategies and tools such as ITS and TDM. I don't know that that's really what the committee was thinking, but they certainly added it on later. So I would ask the other members of the working group kind of what their take is on this goal 1 and the all or nothingness, I guess, of the ITS and TDM portion of this being in the scope that we've seen so far, knowing that the scopes are fairly rudimentary at this time, but also knowing that every single project that happens to have either a signal or some other electronic component to it is going to be upgraded. I mean, it is part of the standards for all the jurisdictions, and that's going to happen. So is that enough to mean that every project already has this and it's a moot point? So Kevin and then Eva.
Yeah, Tom, I guess, as I remember it, the goal originally said something along the lines of probably just manage and reduce congestion. Not sure if those were the exact words, if there's more to it or not. But I think the wording, or we added the strategies and tools such as TDM and ITS just to acknowledge the fact that there's more than one way to manage congestion. In other words, you can manage congestion, sure, by widening a roadway, but that's not the only way to do it. So in my opinion, it's manage and reduce congestion by several different means, not necessarily only TDM and ITS.
Okay, thanks.
That's
Ava?
what I understand it
That's
also.
exactly what I remember too from the conversations that we had in the committee is that you know, there is a real interest in seeing you know, travel demand management that's beyond road widening or more cutting edge than just road widening. And also given the, you know, kind of issues with induced demand, you know, road widening seems like it can be a little bit less of an effective long-term strategy for managing congestion. So I think that's really where the concern, you know, kind of comes from. I think it's hard for, you know, for the committee, for some members of the committee to feel like congestion alone, you know, road widening alone is an adequate response to congestion.
Yeah, so, I mean, this is the standard and really our primary congestion attack goal. And so it seems to me that, you know, a recognition of project's effectiveness is really what this needs to be about. And if the committee wants to give, you know, bonus points, if you will, or higher weight to those kinds of projects that that are utilizing these alternative methods, you know, that maybe that's something the committee would like. I see you have Rod and Jonathan, but Farhad, did you want to chime in something quickly?
Yeah, if I may add, I think maybe if we change the word "and" to "or," that might address the question you had. So whether it's going to be reflected in the scope or not, if we change the "and" to "or," I think that addresses that.
Which and?
Where it says 10 points if poor future congestion and scope reflects. So instead of saying "and," we can say "or" scope reflects ITS, TDM, and I think that addresses what we just talked about. That you may be able to improve, it using other means as well.
And then would we drop the ITS component to the other fair and good conditions?
I would use "or" for those as well. So all of them would have "or," but then the future condition is really what kind of drives your scoring, right?
Okay. Well,
Okay.
do you get 10 points if it's so say ITS and TDM are in the scope? Does that get 10 points, or is it based on the congestion? If it's
I guess I'm suggesting that if they propose to do ITS and TDM, then they should get the points.
The 10 points.
But if they don't,
max. Okay.
Yeah.
Then I think we could drop it from the other two categories.
Yeah, that's up to you all. That's just
jumped
out at me.
Yeah, that kind of makes sense to me too. Rod, did you have something you wanted to contribute? I saw your hand up a minute ago.
No, thank you, Tom. I actually just hit that accidentally, but thank you.
Okay.
I'm listening in quite intently to the conversation.
Okay, anytime. Jonathan.
Hi, yeah, thanks. Really quick. So just speaking from a jurisdictional point of view, oftentimes TDM strategies and to a lesser extent maybe ITS strategies are not necessarily always capital investments. They're more operational and programmatic. I mean, it could be like promoting education. It could be promoting no drive days. It could be increasing transit usage through a variety of means, encouraging travel in non-peak, and a whole variety of strategies. So it's a bit confusing and interpreting how this would be applied if this was expected of the jurisdictions that you will use RTA funds to implement these programs, which are not capital investments. So I'm all supportive of ITS and TDM, but I'm just not seeing how that would really kind of work if this was attached to the project scopes from the jurisdictionalist point of view.
I think that touches on a good point, that a number of these goals are not are programming related, are more aligned to some of the other buckets and less the named project list assessment, and so trying to, you know, that is going to be more likely better. The needle's going to be moved on that likely through non-project related specific funding that is yet to be, you know, decided and discussed. But I guess to acknowledge that goal, you know, like, you know, why like if that is intent, say that, you know, there's a modernization type project that's proposed that acknowledges this is going to be part of their, you know, the strategy, and they're seeing some moderate congestion. Some are going to be better or less suited to the project level assessment, but I don't think that means we shouldn't try to reflect it. I don't know. Trying.
Go ahead, Brian.
I want to go back to something that I think I heard you say earlier, but especially on the technology side of that, which is part of where my, you know, the intelligent or the ITS and TDM comes into, is I see technological components to this as well. And those are standardized, like you said, throughout, you know, many of the projects that are going to come into play. So I appreciate giving points, but if everyone gets those points, then you've still equaled out the playing field at the end of the day. And I don't know that we're gaining much here. And
right.
And trying to speak, I agree. If there is a way to move traffic without having to widen the roadway, I would encourage everyone to take advantage of that. But there are scenarios where current roadways are already over capacity and they simply have to be widened. And with this plan being 20 years out, if they're beyond capacity today, where are they going to be 20 years from now? So I would like to look at all alternatives in this goal for reducing congestion, and how does that look, and have each jurisdiction come forward with the plans to present that, and then being based on that. So that's my input on this one.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. And as we've been saying all along, technology has changed dramatically in the first 16 years of this program of the RTA1. And we'd likely see, if not an increasing rate of improvement or development of these technological tools, then certainly at the same rate. And so there's a lot we don't even know about yet. And we need to be able to recognize that preparing these projects the best we can for acceptance of those, you know, methods and tech, you know, actual hardware, if you will, is important. So I see the point for sure. Kevin?
Yeah, I was just going to throw something out there. It almost seems like ITS TDM should be a categorical, and you know, maybe there's a bucket of money, like you mentioned. Technology changes. We don't even know what's going to be out there in 10 or 15 years as options, and perhaps something along these lines might even be something managed by a PAG. You know, region-wide educational type program, or you know, ITS, regional-wide communication, something like that, I guess is what I'm thinking of. Maybe there's just should be a separate bucket of money for something along those lines.
So if I may, again, as you recall, for the purpose of this exercise, it's only applying to those named projects, but we already do have another category for improving traffic flow. And I think that's what you're talking about, Kevin. And I think that's kind of along the lines of what we've been trying to do to operate the current plan. And I assume the next plan would be the same.
So, thanks, Farhad. So I guess with this one, we were saying that some interpretations needed, and let's and maybe we kind of come back to it. You know, if it's a matter of interpreting the scope, is that something we need to discuss how the group wants to kind of go through that? But Tom, do you mind if we move to the next set to kind of look at those input needed?
Yeah, we need to do that.
Okay, cool. Okay, goal 6, provide safer, mode-connected bicycle and pedestrian facilities, enhance health through active transportation modes. So this is where looking at bike ped level of stress is it's a methodology applied across many regions. It leans heavily on an interpretation of the number of travel lanes on a facility, and oh my gosh, I was just looking at this, and then the facility type. So if you have a 2-lane bicycle or two-lane roadway and there is a bike lane on it as opposed to a separated bike lane, you know, that level of stress for that cyclist is going to be low for both of them because it's a 2-lane facility. It's going to be lower for the separated facility, but if it's a 4-lane facility, that bike lane is going to have a higher level of stress than the separated bike lane. If there is a multi-use path, you know, and a multi-use path would also be considered a separated facility. So that it's an interpretation of kind of proximity of that bike or that bicycle facility to the travel lanes, and then how many travel lanes are there. So that is data that we have at our fingertips that we can provide. Here would be a breakdown, 5 points each for pedestrian. So PLTS is pedestrian level of traffic stress, and BLTS is bike level of traffic stress. And so 3 and 4 would be the higher, 4 is the highest, 1 is the lowest. And so if that project contains BLTS of 3 or 4, then that would have the most potential for reducing that level of stress. Does that make sense? I mean, similar in nature to the way that kind of the scheme is lined up right now.
Yeah. So the higher the level of stress, the more points it gets.
With the intent of being able to reduce that, right?
Yeah, right.
In the design phase.
So we talked about this last time, and I think we were pretty well agreed with that. Is anybody not agreeing with that one for goal 6 on the committee? Rod, you object?
No, I don't object. I just have a question. This is a bit of a unique spot, I think, for ADOT, considering that we manage our facility a little bit differently than everybody else, but we go through some of the more unique areas. So for example, if we're putting in a traffic interchange in a section of the city or a community, and we design it to current standards or relative standards for the adjacent existing facility, and that's what's in our proposal put forth. But the region or the local community desires to expand that and increase for these types of activities, whether it be by putting possibly whole ped bridges or expanding the facilities beyond something that ADOT would normally construct. So therefore, it's not in our program as it stands or submitted, but it can be if the locality of the jurisdictions that it's in would desire that. How is that managed in this scenario?
Well, I think for me, if the community, if the jurisdiction comes forward and says we're going to add some more money to this project, if it's approved in order to deal with these pedestrian or bike issues, whatever they might be, then that becomes a part of that project and gets scored.
And I agree. I think that's the way to go. And I think that's something that can actually be, you can spell that out in the legislation if you wanted to and codify it. So that it's, you know, if you want to put a specific ped bridge in or whatever you want to do, you can put it in the code and require some kind of accounting or whatever would be necessary to satisfy moving that in. But is there a space for that to occur?
If I may, Tom.
Yeah,
So
go ahead, Farhad.
obviously in our case, it really ties back to the scope of the project. If it's not included in the scope of the project, it doesn't mean that we cannot modify and add to the scope through the process. But point well taken, you know, if we start working on these projects, when we identify anywhere that there's a cross connection between the state facility and the local facility, we can always add those to the project scope at a later time.
And I agree with that. I'm just struggling with when and where that discussion would take place, because it has to take place at some point.
Yeah. So it really goes back to ultimately when there's a draft plan prepared between now and when the plan is prepared, we want to work out some of these issues and include it and fine tune the scope. So we'll have plenty of opportunities to have those conversations. The final product hopefully is something that we've all vetted and hopefully everybody supports the scope. So if you see anything, please do let us know and we'll start that conversation with the local entities.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, let's go to goal 7 then.
Great. So this is one that we had identified as individual interpretation being needed and improve quality of air, water, wildlife habitat, and reduce greenhouse emissions and vehicle miles traveled. So I guess the idea with these, we would be soliciting CAC member input on their individual interpretation. That's what had been discussed. I guess we would want to kind of confirm that with our group. Same goes for goal 8 as well, where max user would assign 10 points if they feel that the project has the potential to improve those 2 goal areas, each of those goal areas. So we'd have a 0 to 10 for 7 and a 0 to 10 for 8 kind of question that we'd ask and kind of poll the CAC members that participate.
The idea here is that we don't have good data sources for these items, but there's certainly enough scope information for committee members perhaps to form their own opinion, I guess. Is that accurate, Josh, in your mind?
And to get the group and to get a consensus from the group, to get that read from the group.
Right. Farhad?
I just wanted to add, especially on goal 8, if you recall, the conversation was that key destinations may mean different things to different people. So this gives them that opportunity. Yeah,
good. Rest of the committee okay with that? Understand that? This will be full group conversation, I guess, is the best way to put that.
And to me, it would be similar in nature to the current exercise where we're asking the members to review each project individually and essentially assigning a 0 to 10 for these questions, these two, and then, you know, do we want to step through that also for goal 1? We'd want to kind of close that out. So
all right, so let's finish goals 9 and 10.
Right.
And then,
And so
I'd like
adding-
to circle back to a couple of these where we've made comments
right.
and get the committee to decide, I guess, on how we would add or subtract from or clarify some of the things that are in the draft that we have. So you want to go ahead with 9 and 10?
Goal 9, add multimodal functionality to key corridors. You know, this kind of gets to that point of any of the named projects are gonna, you know, have that as part of their delivery. And so then the question is, what are we assessing, whether or not it's on a key corridor? So there is a, you know, a study that was executed identifying regional significant corridors. And so we could lean on that data set to then, and this is kind of a binary thing, 10 points if you're on it. If the majority of your project's on it, we can do it weighted by length of, so greater than 50% of your project is on a major regionally significant corridor, or 0 points if not. And then kind of a similar construct with improved transit ridership. This is one of those that's probably really more geared towards the categorical, but if we want to look at trying to affect its presence in the project level assessment, are we improving the overall performance, assuming that the investment of tens of millions of dollars or however much a project's going to be investing in a corridor, is it going to improve that overall performance improvement? Is that going to help improve transit ridership, being the assumption? So if that's on a high frequency transit network route, that came out of a LR transit study, recent transit study, we have high frequency transit network that where, you know, project Suntran, you know, project partners helped identify that the extent of that network. Basically, if the majority of the project falls on that high frequency network, then it gets 10 points. And if it doesn't, it gets 0. So
additionally, we do have a couple of projects that are transit projects,
right,
are among our
right
108. At least one of which we heard from the city of Tucson is very high priority for them.
right.
And
That's a
the
good
other
point.
one, the other one's a little bit messy, it sounds like, but that, you know, those are the only two I really see as being directly scored in this way. And I wonder whether the committee thinks that perhaps projects that are transit projects, you know, those two or any others that are primarily transit should have a little higher possibility, or, you know, perfect score, if you will, maybe a 10 there. And if it's on a high, so a project that has some definable improvement of transit ridership can get 10 points, but a project that isn't a specific transit project itself, but does lie on a high frequency transit route and can be demonstrated that this project is likely going to improve ridership either by access to it or the, you know, placement of the ability of Suntran to run express routes or whatever the choice might be, then it can maybe get 5 points and otherwise 0. I don't know how everybody thinks about that.
That makes sense to me.
Farhad.
Just want to briefly add to that. So as you can see, most of the corridors, when they're improved, the bus stops are improved, pullouts are added. So there's amenities that are added to hopefully enhance and make the transit use more convenient as well. So keep that in mind.
Right. How's everybody else feel about this one? Maybe Patricia or Ava?
So if the data source is whether it's on a regionally significant corridor, then like, are we just weighing that, or are we weighing the addition of multimodal functionality?
So I guess addressing goal 9, the all of the named projects in the current RTA have that multimodal component with either entirely a multi-use path or enhancements to bike and ped facilities. Typically,
Equally across the board, all the projects have the exact same kind of multimodal functionality?
Farhad, please correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes, but again, in this context, it's the scope of all the projects that are being proposed. And if you look at the scope, all of them have multimodal improvements included.
So that component is kind of a expected deliverable of the named projects, and kind of moving forward with that assumption. Then it would be a matter of, well, is it on a key corridor?
Okay.
Yeah, I would foresee there to be some problems with the committee on that.
What would you like to see there, or how do you think we can address that?
Well, you know, maybe as we dig in, it will become more obvious. But, you know, in terms of like all projects being created equal in terms of their multimodal components.
Mm-hmm. As an example, just to ask the question, I guess, if you have a project that has big gaps in the sidewalks, let's say, and the project is a full multimodal project, and it fills in those gaps or widens those inadequate sidewalks or whatever it might be. That would score the same as if you're widening a 2-lane roadway to a 4-lane and adding sidewalks where none existed before. And it seems like if I'm hearing Ava right, at least she thinks that there's some additional or some difference in projects of those types. Does that make sense, Ava? I don't want to put words in your mouth.
No, you're totally hearing what I'm kind of concerned about.
So if I may, at least the way we understood this goal was that the emphasis was on key corridors. And there were other goals that are addressing some of the needs we just talked about. So Josh, I think that's kind of where you're going with this too. Is it a key corridor or not? That's really the question.
And I mean, and I guess the other big assumption is the fact that the projects have been in the expectation that they would be, you know, delivering these multimodal.
Yeah. So that's included in the scope. So all you need to do is to confirm that the scope includes multimodal improvements, and is it in a key corridor?
And I guess if we wanted to, using Tom's example that resonated with Ava, I mean, we do have the presence of bike, you know, sidewalk and you know, the facility type. So if we wanted to, you know, if we wanted to pull those two pieces out of improving the conditions and have that be, is it on a multimodal corridor? And, you know, and the sidewalk performance, the good, fair, and poor, is based on presence of sidewalk. And so we could lean on that if we wanted to, on this, where if there are existing sidewalks, even though this new facility is going to come in and potentially make them wider or have them better set back, then it doesn't get as many points as a facility that doesn't have existing continuous sidewalks, for instance. We have that assessment. We have that, we can lean on that.
Yeah, just to throw it out for consideration, maybe this isn't an all or nothing. Maybe this is a
Right.
0 to 10. And, the committee or individuals have to decide where that is. How much improvement are we talking about, and how impactful is it? Brian?
Thank you. One, I tend to agree with you. Maybe it's not an all or nothing, but I tend to celebrate the idea that every single project that I know of in the current RTA and the ones being proposed in the new one aim to improve the multimodal functions of every project. So from those that have no sidewalk or bike path, that they certainly want to implement those into the project, or even where a bike path or sidewalk exists, maybe it is outdated and not as efficient or not as safe as current standards, so that they get upgraded. So I celebrate the idea that every single project that comes forward looks to improve the multimodal aspects for that region. And I think that's a great thing. Again, I think it kind of evens the playing field, like I talked about before, because it's a standard, and it's great that we don't have to come in and fight to say, well, I'll bribe you and give you extra points if you put in a sidewalk or a bike lane. It's just expected that we're going to improve those categories. So for me, again, this kind of becomes a wash, because I believe it's going to be included in everything, and it has been. But I celebrate the fact that that's the case.
Yeah, I mean, even complete streets, which may not change the curb location, but may change everything in between the curbs and outside the curbs, at the very least have ADA improvements that are necessary, maybe curb ramps or slopes or access points, tactile, whatever they have it for call buttons even, and all those sorts of improvements can be very substantial on any of these projects. And if they are on a significant corridor, then, they have kind of that extra oomph is what we're talking about. Rod?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I agree. The multimodal is very important. I'm going to ramp it up to the opposite extreme of the multimodal, which is, again, crossing an interstate. We have to consider if in the next 50 years, where are we going to consider putting railroad crossings for any potential light rails, anything like that. For example, South 6th, I know there's a plan to make that one a transit facility. We have to start having those conversations about if we're going to beef up the bridges in that area and things like that for that level of multimodality as well. Sidewalks are great, but if the city and the region wants to expand its commuter facility and train facility, we have to start looking at where that's going to go and how the participation that's going to be for crossing these major facilities.
Yeah, and another thing that comes to mind is, what if we have a really, we put in a sidewalk where there wasn't one in the project, but it doesn't connect, right? It's like a stretch of sidewalk that isn't connected. Then it's not really, adding necessarily to the functionality if it doesn't connect regionally, right? So that's another place where we could have a little more variety in the scoring versus just like yes or no.
Yeah, and we do have, sponsor provided response on improving bike ped facilities. And so Rod's interstates are not improving bike ped facilities because we don't want to encourage that on the interstate, right? So that is a point of reference. There are a couple of other projects that aren't the interstate facility class that don't have a yes next to it. But we do have that could be used as part of this. Rod, did I misspeak?
Well, I just want to be clear. Yeah, we don't want to encourage bikes on the interstates, but we
Right.
definitely want to encourage cross traffic and
Right.
getting over and the connectivity. That's something we want to move towards. And we encourage that tremendously to
Right.
expand that facility. I just want to make sure that we've got that view out there. Thank you.
Good. Rod?
So I was going to go back to what you said, Tom, earlier, that, potentially make this, 0 to 10, but somehow you want to recognize the key corridors. And I think that's what we were trying to do here. So maybe assign a point, is it a key corridor or not? And then the rest of it can be more subjective.
And we do have that assessment from the sponsors of whether or not the bike ped facilities are to be improved. So we can fold that in. I guess I'm that assessment has been provided.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe a possibility here is assuming the assessment says yes, checks the
Right.
box, let's say,
Right.
then it can get 5 points, and then it can go up to 10 depending on connectivity, as Ava points out, and improvement, filling in of blank spots and the like. The real impact of it.
The connectivity would have to be an individual interpretation. I don't really. So if you want to go there and we ask the committee to provide an interpretation of how they feel the project adds multimodal functionality, as it relates to connectivity, I mean, with these named projects, it's within the scope, it's within the project extent, right, of what the improvements are able to be made. So that analysis, we haven't conducted that analysis. That analysis would be fairly complicated to ask an individual to step through.
No, I don't see it that way, Josh. I think this is more of a committee assessment and perhaps some feedback from the individual jurisdiction as far as what it does for them as far as connectivity. I don't think it is something that we need to have a data source for.
But I think even asking that question, it's complicated to get to provide an answer.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't also think that it's the only thing we're asking about for those 5 points either. Right? I think we're just saying, in general, how good is this project compared to others? And some people will be looking at, oh, here's another project that intersects with it and connects over to a park or to a linear park or the loop or something. And those are the kinds of projects that might mean more to some people, including voters.
And I feel like that goal 8 touches on that.
Yeah. Yep. I agree.
So I mean, I don't want to try to. Okay, go on.
No, I get you. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, I agree with both of you. So if I understand you, up to 5 points is more subjective, 0 or 5 if it's a key corridor. And then this way we can address some of those more subjective pointing systems. So having said all that, I just want to check with you, Tom. I know we're running out of time. So I believe there's hopefully some consensus on where we're going with this.
Yeah, what I'd like to do is kind of read back to the committee the notes that we've made on each of these and get a consensus from the committee that that's what our proposal is at this point. So can we go back to actually, yeah, that's fine. We'll go back to number one. In my notes, we were recognizing basically that we could make some better use of the language perhaps and use ors instead of ands in some places, but it's also recognizing that ITS and TDM may very well mostly be handled within the categorical. And so this goal is as we see it there with perhaps a little bit more explanation. Josh, do you want to, as I lay out what I remembered, do you want to clarify or correct me?
Yeah.
Anybody else on the committee that feels like I haven't framed it properly?
And I kind of left this needing to come back to this because this is one of the three that we'd identified for needing interpretation. And so, I wasn't sure if this is if we wanted the group to step through that exercise of evaluating the scope, or if that was something that you wanted to ask staff to do to step through that, or, because it's kind of a two-part, does it have congestion or does it have that ITS? We can have it available. I'm for the three that we've, and potentially four now that we have identified as needing interpretation. It's going to be similar in nature to the exercise that we've asked everybody to go through, where we'll have a column of CAC goal alignment needed. You click on that needed, and it's going to give you a pop-up of the 3 or 4 goals and asking the individual CAC member to rank it 0 to 10. And I'm thinking to have the scope in that pop-up so you don't have to look at another screen. And then you would answer those, address goal 1, goal 7, 8, and 9, potentially. So do we want to have this in that list that we're asking individual members to provide their feedback on? Or does that make sense? Or do we want it to be an interpretation?
Yeah, I know what you're saying, but the way that we have it kind of proposed here is something that staff can do, I think.
Yeah, if I may, that would be my recommendation too, mainly because we do have the data and we can present the data easily.
Yeah,
I think that makes, I think reducing the number of where there is interpretation and feedback, because this is fairly straightforward assessment that we can do the homework on.
Brian?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, a separate note. I know we only got 10 minutes left, but I need to jump off this call a little early, so I wanted to let you know, and my hope is it doesn't affect your quorum.
No, we're still good. Thanks, Brian.
Okay. Thank you. You all have a great day.
Okay. All right, so that was goal 1.
Okay.
Any other comments on that? Okay, so for goal 2, we were looking at the safe part of it as addressed by the level of safety service. The reliable and efficient, we were using the travel time index. And healthy, I didn't write down what our conversation was about how we were addressing that. But in general, it seems that we ended up saying that this goal would be met by looking at the TTI and recognizing that safety is more directly addressed in other goals.
And the healthy is reflected in the active modes, multimodal components.
Yeah, right. Sorry, missed it.
There was also suggestion from Paul from the county to include PTI. It's another expression of TTI. We can split it we can split 5 for TTI and 5 for PTI if we wanted. We could look at
And
that.
remind me what PTI was.
I'm sorry, planning time index. So
Yeah.
how consistently
I
are you
hadn't
going to
heard
be
that
able to avoid or be in congestion, based on those assumptions?
Oh, good.
Would you
Did
want,
everybody else on the call catch that when I was apparently napping?
Sounds good.
so
Yeah,
add PTI and kind of have the max for each be 5?
yeah.
Okay.
Okay, goal 3, to reduce taxes, crashes. We had talked about adding something that reflects vulnerable population crashes, and perhaps through the SPF metric. And I think Kevin suggested that there be a direction for an RSA type of assessment during the design phase, if it isn't already just standard operating procedure, which it didn't seem to me that it is yet, but
No, it actually is.
expect it to be. It is?
Yes, sir.
The PTI is?
No, the
RSA.
the
The dra-
RSA is. The
the
RSA.
design
Well, the
level
RSA
RSAs.
is, but this is beyond what the RSA would normally be looking at, right?
I'm not following.
I'm not clear. I think from our perspective, the RSA is done on all design and in some cases even construction. So if that's what you're talking about, it's
Oh,
already
yeah.
integrated in our planning process.
Yeah, okay, you're right. I'm sorry. I guess I'm a doctor at heart because I couldn't read my own writing. For goal 4, we had the potential of adding wildlife assessment to the design phase RSA on these projects.
And also you had suggested inverting the scoring regime to have it in alignment with the other potential for impact.
Right.
Yeah, we can do that.
Any comments from other members about that one? All right. Goal 5, I didn't see that we made changes on that. Josh, did you see any?
No, I don't.
discussing?
And I had referenced maybe pulling out the sidewalk and bike lanes into the multimodal discussion of group goal 9. But if we don't want to do that, we can leave them here and, they could have the effect on the conditions.
Yeah, and I think the fact that the committee was, pretty forceful about including all transportation modes and debated different ways of inserting it before coming up with that, means that we should probably keep it in there. How's the rest of the committee feel about that?
I agree.
Okay.
Yep.
Now, number 6.
Bike ped level of stress seemed like there was a comfort level there.
Yeah, and then 7 and 8, we agreed would be kind of committee discussion. And these will be where your pop-up buttons will be. And then 9 and 10, we just went over, made 9 0 to 10, versus it being all or nothing, kind of as it shows here. And goal 10 for transit would give us a 0, 5, or 10 as possibilities. And those would be 5 if it's a high frequency transit network, 10 if it's an actual transit project. I remember that right, everybody?
That's correct. I think goal 9, there was more discussion on the 0 to 10 and potentially
Yeah, the
having.
9, if you recall, the recommendation was to probably break it up 0 to 5 if it's regionally significant, and then 5 points for more subjective.
So that would be a third piece that we'd be asking the jurisdictional or the committee to review.
Yeah, for 5 points on that one.
Okay. All right. What else did I miss, committee? All right. I'd like to ask for the committee to approve this as we've discussed it. We'll ask staff to prepare this in a way that we can show it to our colleagues on the committee. Let me just ask if you'd all unmute and say if you're in favor of this, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
So, Mr. Chair, just for the sake
Any
of our
opposed?
notes, the motion is being made by you.
Yes.
Okay, and a second by Mary. Thank you.
All right. Any opposed?
Who was that?
That was my dog. He doesn't
He's
know
on the
anything
committee.
about it.
He's not on the committee.
Non-voting member.
Okay. Yeah. So we have 5 to nothing with 1 abstention, I guess was the.
From.
Okay. All right.
Thank
Thanks
you
so
all.
much, Josh. Great job
Thank you,
guiding us through
everyone.
this. Appreciate it. And thanks everybody for the input.
It really did a good job to walk through all this. So thank you so much for taking the time with us.
Right on. And thanks Farhad for helping us clarify a lot of this.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you all. Appreciate it. This would be really helpful to the rest of the committee as well.
For sure. Okay, I'd say we're adjourned, but I think that's Pocky's job to adjourn us.
You are all adjourned.
Well done. All right.
Thank you.
Thanks,
All right.
everybody. Talk to you
Thank
soon.
you.
Bye.